Hi, everyone. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I'm Yves Engler. I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. Hope everyone is doing well this evening out here, at least in the East Coast. So unfortunately, we have clearly been under attack over the past few weeks. There's some force out there that wants the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour to not work, and they have clearly come at this both via their screen sharing and noises and chat, so we're trying to lock things down a little bit better, and hopefully there's not too much disruption or racism or whatever was in the chat last week. Yeah, hopefully we'll make that hopefully a bit smoother ride, and whoever it is that wants to undermine this isn't able to do so. So today, yes, beginning yesterday, was the starting of one of the most important conferences, quite frankly, on Canadian foreign policy, which is the Prospectors Developers Association of Canada conference in Toronto, convention in Toronto. It is a massive endeavor. They claim 30,000 up to 30,000 participants, 1,100 exhibitions, 130 countries. A decade ago, when I was working for the Unifor, what was then Communications Energy Paperworkers Union, I had to go to Toronto, and we had a hotel that was just the standard hotel you stayed at, the Delta. Huge, massive hotel downtown Toronto, close to the bus station where I would usually take the bus in. And as I got in, I tried to book the room. I never had any trouble getting a room last minute. And the Delta was booked up. Then I ended up having this whole evening of going from hotel to hotel in Toronto, even though I had a union credit card, so the cost wasn't particularly important. I wasn't, paying out of pocket, and so and I had to like 10 or 12 different hotels that I had to go from either calling or going to. They were all full, and I later figured out that it was because the PDS, the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada meeting, was taking place in Toronto that those days that I was coming in. So it's a huge thing. They say there's 130 countries represented. It's, I think, usually considered the biggest mining convention in the world. Now, the reason, of course, that it is such an important thing is about half of the world's mining companies are based or listed in Toronto. So Toronto really is a global mining hub, mostly small companies. But the event's also very important politically. So, for instance, at today's events, Chrystia Freeland is there, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne is there, Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkins is there, Wilkinson's Parliamentary Secretary Julie Dabroussin is there. There's a huge the Canadian government's involved in so many different facets of the convention. The Trade Commissioner Service has its own booth or exhibit area, and I just watched a little video from them on Twitter, and they talk about the services they're offering, and so trying to get representatives of companies that are operating in different countries around the world and get them make contact with the Trade Commissioner Service. And they boast on their site about how many companies last year's convention they hooked up with different trade commissioners around the world. I think they said 60 different companies, 25 different trade commissioners, and they have a list. It's multiple African countries, some Canadian ambassadors are at the convention. So Canada's ambassador to Peru, Louise Marcotte, is there, and I think it's tomorrow. He's opening the session for the Peru Day at the convention. And that, of course, is in the context of the recent coup and sort of the controversy over pushing Canadian mining interests in Peru at a time when you have a illegitimate government in place, and obviously also you have a long history of violence against communities resisting Canadian mining companies in Peru. Kirsten Francescone has a very good piece on Canadian Dimension. I think it was published yesterday or the day before, titled "State-Sanctioned Violence in Peru and the Role of Canadian Mining," where she goes through some of the history of Peruvian government backing for mining companies that are resisted by local communities, and also about the diplomatic support that the Canadian embassy gives to Canadian mining companies operating in Peru. So the PDAC conference or convention in Toronto is this huge bringing together of mostly corporate mining, but also government officials and officials from around the world to advance the interests of the extractive sector. Now, as people I'm sure are aware, Canadian mining companies are involved in abuses all around the world, and there's just innumerable examples of Canadian mining companies destroying local ecosystems, causing human rights violations, killing people, paying for security, police that kill people. Now, and a lot of that is done directly and indirectly with the support of the Canadian government. So the idea that there's just sort of this corporate mining sector and then there's government policy is a real mistake. It's completely intertwined, and it deserves there's a whole book, certainly multiple Zoom sessions to detail it all. But just to go over a few of the more obvious, you have Canadian prime ministers that make diplomatic trips to support Canadian mining companies, including companies that are being resisted by local communities or opposed by the government in place. You have hundreds of millions of dollars over the years that the Canadian government has spent on mining education projects, geological training in different countries. Ethiopia is one example. West Africa, there's recent initiatives. Huge amounts of money spending just to sort of like stoke the mining sector. And with Canadian companies, the biggest players in the mining sector, in most countries, it's invariably Canadian capital that's going to benefit from the sort of skills development that the mining sector needs. You have the Canadian government spending hundreds of millions of dollars as well, directly and indirectly, on structural adjustment programs. So Canadian Aid Agency through the 1980s and 90s put a whole bunch of money into pushing structural adjustment in African countries, particularly, but also via the IMF and the World Bank. The Canadian government was a real big proponent of structural adjustment, which usually one of the first things it did was open up countries' mining sectors to foreign corporations. You have Canadian government writing mining codes in many, many countries around the world. The most well-documented and egregious case was in Colombia in the early 2000s, where they just slashed the Canadian Aid Agency funded mining code rewrite, slashed royalty rates, gave companies the longer ability to control the concessions, undermined ecological concerns, etc. Just completely in favor of foreign mining companies. And again, this is Canadian aid money to Colombia that helped rewrite the mining code. And at the most extreme, the Canadian government actually had a plan to invade Jamaica in the 1970s and 1980s, and the Canadian military even trained on this plan, if a Jamaican socialist government or movement would nationalize or threaten Alcan, which was then a Montreal-based firm, bauxite interests in Jamaica. So even had to go to the extent of like military planning for an invasion to protect Canadian mining interests. So there was some resistance to the PDAC conference in Toronto. They had an action yesterday. There's Mining Watch is inside and documenting some of what's going on, and the Mining Injustice Solidarity Network is they put up some posters, and there's some. I'm not sure if there's actually a demo planned. There has been demos in previous years, but there is some actions being planned in resistance to this huge mining conference taking place in Toronto. Quickly, the fossil fuel lobby announced that they are expecting that Canadian investment in oil and gas this year will increase 11% to $40 billion. So no matter what we learn about the climate crisis, no matter what happens in terms of more and more displacement and death directly due to the climate crisis around the world, particularly, of course, those who are least responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions, the Canadian oil and gas industry are ramping up production. Yesterday was the 10th anniversary of Hugo Chávez's death, the former president of Venezuela. It should be noted that in April 2002, when Chávez was briefly ousted by the military for about 48 hours, the Canadian government was silent on that coup, and it wasn't until he was returned that there was any statement from the Canadian government. So the Canadian government very much aligned with Washington's position on Chávez at that time. And of course, as we know, in recent years, they have continued with a bid to oust the Bolivarian government movement. The Globe and Mail had an article on Saturday titled "Liberal Government's Feminist Assistance Agenda at Risk Unless Foreign Aid Spending Boosted, Experts Say." So it was a bunch of the Oxfam, bunch of the government-funded NGOs saying that if they don't increase Canadian aid, that the feminist policy is going to be threatened. And honestly, I don't know how any progressive person could look at the Justin Trudeau government's foreign policy and be like, that if we just had more Canada involvement in the world, that would lead to a feminist foreign policy. It's so obvious and overwhelming that the Canadian government is contributing to injustices in so many different places in the world, that the idea that you need to have more Canada in the world via increased aid spending, that would then have a feminist foreign policy just is to my mind completely divorced from any sort of analysis of Canadian foreign policy. Now, the NGOs calling for more aid money are, of course, hoping to get that money themselves. So it's a very self-interested demand versus saying, how can you have a feminist foreign policy while selling weapons to the Saudi monarchy? Or how can you have a feminist foreign policy while voting against UN resolutions defending the rights of Palestinian women? Or, we can get into other questions of violence in Ukraine and Canada's imperialism in Haiti and on and on and on, that in my mind are clearly not feminist and clearly undermine women's rights, or just for that matter, the huge increase in Canadian military spending. That all these things undermine anything that would be seriously considered a feminist foreign policy. But these NGOs are structured towards a more aid not a less Canadian imperialism kind of outlook. And in fact, if you go back in its roots, the Canadian International Development Agency promoted NGOs explicitly as a way to have a lobby to increase aid spending, right? So in the context of the Cold War, geopolitical competition, aid has always been primarily about a geopolitical tool to keep countries aligned with the West or NATO, to stunt radical decolonization. That was the initial objective of Canadian aid, going back to the Colombo Plan of 1950 after India's independence and in the context of Mao's victory in China. So the Colombo Plan was basically designed to keep Indian elites aligned with don't go too far in breaking away from London and from radical decolonization. And so Canadian aid has always been a geopolitical tool, and in its early years, the Canadian International Development Agency understood that having these NGOs that would lobby for increased aid spending, that had NGOs that had a bit more sort of were better viewed by the public, having them demanding for increased aid was what really served the bureaucratic interests of CIDA and served the geopolitical interests of foreign aid spending, which was part of the NATO Western geopolitical game. And we see that right till today, right? So you have these NGOs who are dependent on government funding, and they're willing to, in my opinion, really quite debase themselves by saying, if you just give a bit more aid funding, then you'll have a feminist foreign policy, as if like a whole series of Canadian government policies, from pushing the mining sector to arms exports, to increasing military spending, to imperialism in Haiti, to stoking a proxy war in Ukraine, as if a little bit more Canadian aid spending will just, overcome all of that injustice is in my opinion, quite a comment on official Canadian foreign policy and how much the institutions of Canadian foreign policy, including the NGO sector, are so much aligned with the Canadian government global project. So Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly declared very forcefully, Canada will never tolerate any form of foreign interference in our democracy and internal affairs by China, which at a G20 summit, meeting her Chinese counterpart, which Jemima Pierre from Black Alliance for Peace quote tweeted saying, Haiti would like to have a word with you. Haiti, of course, has experienced a certain amount of Canadian interference in its democracy, and even more narrowly in its elections, most obviously in 2006, 2010, in terms of elections, very aggressive Canadian interference, and in its democracy, very aggressively for at least since the start of this century. And so over the past week, the China interference, election interference kind of story, democracy interference story has really just kept going since last week. There are some interesting elements to it. This week's issue of the Hill Times has a whole bunch of stories that go at it from different angles that are, some of them I think are quite illuminating. One thing that I do want to mention is that one of the big players in pushing this, one of the three main people, reporters pushing this whole CSIS leak about Chinese interference, is Robert Fife. And Robert Fife was who was actually named in the Maharrar Commission, the Justice Ontario, I think it was a former Ontario Supreme Court Justice, who talks about how Fife was the person who relayed these leaks from CSIS at a moment when even the Prime Minister wanted Maharrar to be returned home from a Syrian jail. and CSIS was trying to undermine this effort to return him, and Robert Fife completely unsubstantiated allegations against Arar. And so you have a situation, I think, that you see some of the similar dynamics where this reporter, clearly very close to the intelligence apparatus, is participating in this sort of this leak campaign to try to hype up the China interference angle. Now, one of the things that one of the big claims on the China interference angle is that a liberal backbench MP, Han Dong, was aided by the consulate, the Chinese consulate in Toronto, in becoming the liberal nominee back in 2019 for Don Valley North, the riding of Don Valley North, which has a significant Chinese Canadian community. And they basically say that the Chinese consulate helped bus in people from international students, Chinese international students, and seniors. And I guess, the Chinese international students, you can actually vote in liberal nomination races, even if you're not a Canadian citizen. So that's one of the big claims of this Chinese interference. But according to one anti-China person who's close to the ground, somebody who's published multiple stories, actually, in the National Post, Karen Lynn Woods, I believe is her name. The main competitor against Han Dong in that liberal nomination race that he won by a pretty small margin is also a very pro-China person. So she says that this makes no sense. It makes no sense that the consulate would have engaged heavily in getting him the nomination, because whether it was him or the other one that he apparently beat by 50 votes, the person's name is Jiang Bangu, that they both were sort of similarly pro-mainland China, which at one level is just another way of saying that riding has a Mandarin-speaking population that doesn't want to get involved in the anti-China kind of direction that politics are going, and it's amazing. So the media had a story about how Han Dong, who's again is supposed to have a number of Terry Glavin, others are calling an agent of China. They're openly, conservative MPs call him an agent of China. That was a quote. They're saying how he didn't vote on both of the Uyghur resolutions in the House of Commons. He left. He wasn't there. He didn't vote. But yet they don't even. So there's a story all about that. But they don't talk about an obvious. If the Chinese consulate was working so hard to get him the nomination, who is he going up against? That's a pretty obvious thing to look at, and presumably you would be making your case that they intervene on his behalf if the other person was viewed as anti-Beijing. But according to this commentator, who I don't have any reason to distrust, the other candidate was also pro-Beijing. So it's a sort of irrelevant intervention, and makes no sense that they would devote significant energy to this. But nonetheless, this whole Chinese interference, labeling liberal MPs, Chinese Canadian MPs as agents of China, this is taken off, and this is floating out there. And there's polls that show that significant chunk of particularly conservative voters believe that the Chinese influenced the recent elections, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this whole thing is going to the point where Premier Legault in Quebec had to say a couple of days ago, was asked, he says, there's no foreign interference in Quebec election. So the Chinese government didn't get Legault elected. So I was concerned there. Next thing we know, we're going to hear about how the City Council of Montreal, no, the Chinese government, and then it's going to be the school board. No, the Chinese government didn't get the school board, of Pickering, Ontario. It wasn't the Chinese government that got them all elected. So that's the direction we're going at with all of this. There's a Hill Times piece that whether this is true or not, I know, but I thought it was kind of interesting. The Hill Times piece arguing that this sort of China frenzy is going so far is that he thinks that Poilievre, the conservative leader, might even be able to really a campaign on it. And he's saying that in the next election, depending on some geopolitical dynamics, that you could see a situation where Polyev has had as one of his slogans, "Say no to Beijing, vote for Polyev." I don't know, but like with what the Americans are doing and pushing everything, that's plausible, especially if there ends up being some violent conflict around Taiwan. But that's I think the direction of the sort of political zeitgeist in the Canadian media and political realm. And as part of that, the Canadian government banned on all of its federal employees have banned TikTok, right? Because TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, federal employees are not supposed to have TikTok on their government devices. And that's trickled down to like many provincial employees, governments have done it. I got a friend sent me something that the English Montreal School Board also has just banned TikTok from their employees. And Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, was asked. He's got far and away the most TikTok followers of any Canadian politician, like 850,000. I think the next I saw was like Polyev had like 150,000 or something like that. And apparently Singh is like really good on TikTok. He really knows, like, I'm not on the device or the app, so I don't really know what he's doing on there. But apparently he's very skilled at the TikTok game. And Singh has been forced to pause his TikTok account. I think I might even have seen something saying that he's talking about actually getting rid of his TikTok account. So even though it's like a domain where he's really successful, the whole pressure has got to the point where he feels the need to say, I'm going to pause because TikTok's dangerous now. All of a sudden, TikTok is really dangerous. And so he's pausing his TikTok. And there was a story in the paper, Canadian Press has a story that was published I think it was in the Globe today, where the Broadbent Institute, which is the kind of NDP aligned think tank, that has its big conference coming up, I think on Wednesday or Thursday. And I guess TikTok is one of the sponsors of the conference. And there's a story all about how the Broadbent Institute's not going to buckle. They're going to keep TikTok as a sponsor. But this is like now a big controversy over some Canadian think tank having TikTok as a sponsor for a conference. But I think the real question should be, why would the Broadbent Institute be sponsored by the corporate world? That's a far more important question than whether that company's Chinese or American or whatever. But nonetheless, that's where we're at. And in the light of this interference, Peter Julian, who's on the parliamentary committee that's looking at the whole interference thing, an NDP MP, his position, which he on Twitter on all of this is just one of his positions that he's announcing on Twitter is just beyond me about just how far we've gone, where the NDP is at politically, geopolitically, really was what we're talking about. Peter Julian tweeted out, quote, Ukrainian Canadians need to know that Conservative MPs are right now trying to kill a national public inquiry motion that would include an investigation of dirty tricks done to our democracy by Russia. Tell your Conservative Party MP to stand up to Putin and his tactics. So basically, if I understand it correctly, Julian was calling for this foreign interference committee or inquiry to be broader than just China. So the Conservatives wanted just a China inquiry, and he wants to also throw in Russian interference, right? and so he's like hitting at the Russiagate, which, as anybody who's paid attention to news knows, the government set up this whole committee to look at foreign interference a few years ago, and it was all not about China; it was all about Russia, right? And they came out with the report back 2019. There was no evidence of the Russian interference, no evidence of foreign interference. And now they just sort of like quickly switched to the China interference. And as part of their sort of NATO proxy war support, the NDP is taking the position that this foreign interference committee, now you can't just go China, you have to also bring in the Russians, because the Russians are also screwing with our democracy. And I just, you don't know what to say to this. This is, and not just, that he's saying, I actually, again, I don't have any problem with a serious investigation into foreign interference in both, either narrow in terms of just elections, or quite frankly, more broadly, and look at, the Fraser Institute getting all this money from the Koch brothers, right? Like $4.5 million that the Koch brothers gave the Fraser Institute in the last 5 years or 10 years or whatever, all these foreign American companies and hard right American interests funding Canadian think tanks, and, American government funding, disinformation campaigns by the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I think either narrowly looking at, foreign interference to elections, or more broadly, foreign interference into, Canadian political sphere, I think both of those are, could be worthwhile endeavors. But not as part of these, follow the US empires, target China, or follow NATO's proxy war on Russia. This just speaks to how much the NDP has gone down the path of US empire's worldview. And it's pretty remarkable. Of course, people may have seen that NDP foreign affairs critic Heather McPherson was on a NATO NATO parliamentary trip across a number of European countries, I guess a few days ago, a week ago, or something like that. And then when that ended, she went to Kyiv. So McPherson did what Trudeau has done, and did what she did it along at the same time as the chief of the defense staff, the head of the Canadian military, was also in Kyiv, or maybe in Ukraine. Maybe it was just in Lviv. I'm not sure. A couple of days ago, the same time as McPherson. And, she did, it's all about expressing support, building, demonstrating Canada's commitment to the proxy war. And of course, this is not the first thing that first time McPherson has done some variation of that. Wayne, here, yesterday's the CBC The National began with the Canadian military training in Poland, and how much Canada's training the Ukrainian forces in Poland now. And they interviewed the chief of the defense staff, who I guess went to Poland after being in Ukraine. And they talked about how Canada's training Ukrainian troops that are has been training Ukrainian troops that are going to be on the front lines, in days, according to the CBC story. And this is on top of the training taking place in the UK as well. So Canada, its role in training and is continuing in that. With regards to the whole question of foreign interference, I thought I would have discuss another angle of that. There's many different angles that deserve to be discussed on this question. But Trudeau, I think on Friday, in response to some of the pressure, he at a press conference, and this similar comment was made by his his head security advisor in the parliamentary committee. Trudeau said, "We know that Chinese Canadian parliamentarians and Chinese Canadians in general are greater targets for interference by China and others. We know the same goes for Iranian Canadians, who are more subject to interference from the Iranian government. Russian speakers in Canada are more vulnerable to Russian misinformation and disinformation." So he cites Chinese, Iranian, and Russian Canadians as being sort of pressured by those countries to, in one way, take up those countries' causes within the Canadian political realm. Now, there's a very notable, many, but there's one specifically notable omission to that, which is Jewish Canadians and Israel, right? And if you look at it from the standpoint of MPs, right, the biggest Israel lobbyist MP in the House of Commons is Anthony Housefather, who now leads the Canada-Israel Interparliamentary Group, who meets regularly with Israeli consul ambassador, and he replaced Michael Levitt. Michael Levitt, who was the head of the Canada-Israel Interparliamentary Group, he left because he wanted to go full time to Israel lobbying as the head of the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. And part of this whole labeling of China interference, one of the angles that's gotten a lot of attention in recent days is the fundraising dinner that Trudeau attended in 2016, where there was a Chinese-Canadian billionaire, I'm forgetting his name and I forgot to write it down here, who's one of the people who the CSIS document says a Chinese official suggested he give a donation to the University of Montreal, to the Trudeau Foundation and the University of Montreal for an initiative. And in it, they talk about this fundraiser, the home of the head of the Canada Chinese Business Council in 2016. Now, all this was reported on in 2016. And it's interesting. I went back and I read this story that Bob Fife and Stephen Chase, so the same people reporting all this stuff in the Globe Mail now. The story in 2016 took much more of the line of like rich people getting access to the prime minister and much less of the sort of China angle to it all. And I think we definitely should be concerned about rich people donating money to the politicians and getting special access. That isn't an angle that should be high on our political concern. I don't think the Chinese angle. I think the Chinese angle is worth considering, as are other foreign countries' angles. The idea that the sort of China lobby, if you want to call it that they're through their fundraising has had even like a tenth of the impact of the Israel lobby and fundraising on Trudeau is just complete nonsense. And back in 2013, the Globe Mail actually reported on this, and the Globe Mail, in this story about Trudeau's just after he became leader of the Liberals, it's a long, I'll quote this long passage. It says, quote, Justin Trudeau is banking on multimillionaire Stephen Bronfman to turn around the Liberal Party's financial fortunes in order to take on the formidable Conservative fundraising machine. Bronfman, of course, is a long-standing, his family sent guns back in 1947, sent guns to the Haganah, the Zionist forces in pre-state Israel, a long-standing a Zionist family. The story goes on to say, Mr. Bronfman helped raise $2 million for Mr. Trudeau's leadership campaign. Mr. Bronfman is hoping to win back the Jewish community, whose fundraising dollars have been going more and more to the Tories because of the party's pro-Israel stand. Now, quoting Bronfman, the story says, quote, "We'll work hard on that," said Mr. Bronfman, adding that, quote, "Stephen Harper has never been to Israel, and I took Justin there 5 years ago, and he was referring at the end of the trip to Israel as, quote, we. So I thought that was pretty good." So here you have in 2013, Bronfman explicitly, in the Globe Mail, explicitly linking, he leads the party's fundraising whole apparatus, explicitly linking it to Israel and talking about how he took Trudeau to Israel years before. And, Harper's not even as pro-Israel as Trudeau, because Trudeau was in Israel 5 years ago with me, and he started calling Israel as we. I don't exactly know what that means, but it's supposed to be good. And they're just saying it's open. And then there's a whole bunch of examples of Trudeau attending different fundraisers at the Sherman family in 2016 and future ones with Mitch Garber. Mitch Garber boasts that his son fought in the IDF, etc. The idea that the China lobby is had, like a tenth of the, from a strictly fundraising impact on Trudeau's policy versus the Israel lobby is just complete and utter nonsense. But the Israel lobby fundraising, Bronfman can boast about it in the Globe and Mail, and it's viewed in a sort of like positive light. Even though if you actually would take a serious assessment of the policies of the two countries, the policies of Israel, in fact, are much more odious than China. And we should also point out there's an abundance of evidence of the Liberals bending over backwards in support of Israel, organizing a pizza party for Canadians fighting in the Israeli military, or Chrystia Freeland saying that if Canada won a seat on the Security Council, it would be an asset for Israel. Like our getting on the Security Council was to serve Israel's interests. You have abundance of examples of how the fundraising from Israel lobby forces have had much more success in determining liberal policy than on the China file, where at the best what you can say is that Trudeau has been a little bit more reticent to fully join the U.S. empire's target China policy. He's joined big chunks of it, but it's not as necessarily always, excitingly joined in or jumped into it like the Canadian military or the U.S. military may want. So just a couple of other questions on the Palestine developments on the Palestine question. The Toronto Sun had a story about Sarah Jama, who's a Black Hamiltonian who is in for the nomination for Andrea Horwath's Hamilton Centre seat, the NDP nomination, and a seat that she'll most likely win if she gets the nomination, and talks about how she had ties to Palestine solidarity. And they quote the Conservative Party in Ontario saying, only Merritt Stiles, who's the head of the NDP Ontario, can decide if she will allow anti-Semitism to continue to take root in the NDP. So the candidacy of this pro-Palestinian Black Hamiltonian woman is being B'nai B'rith and others have come out saying that it's enabling anti-Semitism within the NDP. At the same time as pro-Palestinian voices are being smeared like that, you have a former mayor of the settlement of Kedemon, a West Bank settlement. There's a Twitter clip of this Daniela Weiss, who's the former mayor of this settlement of 5,000, just totally celebrating the pogrom about a week ago against the Palestinian village, calling for more violence and more destruction of Palestinian towns. And this Kedemon, where she was the mayor, I think until quite recently, there's a charity that's a registered. Canadians can make a donation to the Kedemon charity and get a tax receipt through Misrachi Canada, right? So we're not just supporting this in many different ways indirectly, but like we're literally, if you start looking at this, you'll find that a lot of these fanatical settlement organizations, they're the pogromists, if you want to call them that. They're getting funding subsidized by the Canadian taxpayer. And there was a story that broke a few days ago about this school in Halifax, Park West School, where a number of Palestinian students, for this like cross-cultural day, they wore the keffiyeh. They wore keffiyehs, and the principal apparently told them they had to take off their keffiyeh and said it represented war colors. So the Palestinian headscarf represented war colors, and they had to take it off. And fortunately, there was a big campaign, thousands of emails sent. Now there was 2 stories today in the Halifax CBC and I think the Halifax CTV, and now the school's all on the back foot. And no, it was a misunderstanding. We didn't really call in these grade 7s into the principal's office and, trying to put a bit of a PR spin on the whole thing. So there's a very good pushback, and that's great. But this is just one example of these schools. In the Ottawa District School Board, a huge battle over Palestinians, about a year-old battle now, and they had the protest, the Palestinian Youth Movement protest, because Palestinian flag, they had a flag day at the cafeteria, but they weren't allowed the Palestinian flag. And there's a video, I believe, that was not allowed to be shown about the occupation. There's obviously the IHRA battle at many different school boards trying to get this anti-Palestinian definition of anti-Semitism. You had this recent one in the Ontario Student Teachers Federation, a workshop for the union, for some of the educators, and talked about anti-Palestinian racism and Nakba denial. There's a huge pushback, and the Toronto Sun published. So it's a real battle in public schools over Palestine solidarity, or even just, quite frankly, symbols of Palestine and them being, suppressed. Now, at the same time that that's going on, you have all of these private Jewish schools that are engaged in just horrendous propaganda, if you want to call it, indoctrination of young minds, right? Of young kids who are in these schools and pushing. I talked last week about the JNF event in Montreal, where there's like 270 kids from these like grade 3s and 4s, like 7 and 8-year-olds, who do this JNF day, and they have a big flag, a big map, and it's all of the West Bank and Gaza are part of Israel, and they're pushing their racist colonial line. Also, you go on the JNF site, there's these photos with these like 7 and 8-year-old kids that have IDF, Israel Defense Forces t-shirts on, right? Now, Tannenbaum Chat is the biggest private school in the country, Toronto school. And I was back on their site doing an article on some of this stuff. And I written about them a couple years ago. They have IDF days, right? They have IDF days, right? A Toronto school in 2023 has IDF Day, and we're just going to promote the Israeli military. We're going to fundraise for the military. There's photos of these kids, multiple kids, all have their IDF shirts, right? The kids get pressured to wear IDF shirts to school in 2023 in Toronto. It's quite sickening. It really is outrageous when you see this, and you see that Palestinian symbols are being the kafir or Palestinian flag are being banned at schools, and then other schools are like pressuring the kids to have to wear IDF shirts and doing IDF fundraisers. And Tannenbaum Chat is really open about it, right? They're like their statement of purpose talks about Israel engagement. They boast about their alumni who go fight for, join the IDF. They bring in Israeli soldiers to talk to the kids regularly. Just a few weeks ago, there was another example. They have these, it's called, get the name, Shilism. Basically, they have emissaries. So young Israelis who can defer a year of going into the IDF can come and live in Toronto and be connected to the school and just basically promote Israel at the school, right? So it's really amazing. And I there's this the teacher, one of the teachers, Aviva Polanski, I believe is her name. She was involved in this controversy because back in 2019, she took a bunch of the Tannenbaum Chat kids to the APAC conference in Washington D.C. And she posted a photo with Stephen Gorka, who was a Trump administration, like a far right official in the Trump administration. So he was considered controversial not because he was anti-Palestinian, but because he was sort of far right kind of fascistic kind of figure. And it created a bit of a controversy. I listened to this video yesterday or the day before that this history teacher, Tannenbaum Chat, has about what she does in her class. And she's explicit that she says this explicitly in this video, she doesn't let non-Zionist views into her class. So if a student, and she's saying this publicly, there's some big audience, that if some student starts expressing a non-Zionist view, she basically makes it like this is the ground rules and this is my class, and you have to endorse Zionism if you want to be in my class. And so I think it's absolutely incredible that in 2023, to the best of my knowledge, I am the only person who has publicly written about, put out even a tweet for that matter, press release, campaign, rally, whatever it should be, around the fact there is a large private school in Toronto, again, apparently the largest private school in the whole country, that has IDF days. They're not hiding it, it's open, and it's absolutely outrageous that happens, and it's absolutely necessary. There are many examples of private schools. There was an outrage at I think St. Thomas or whatever in Toronto about the abuse, the sort of homophobia and the abuse at that old private school. There's a whole bunch of examples of private schools getting lots of public pressure from outside for outrageous political, ideological, whatever positions that they hold. And in 2023, there should not be an IDF day at any school in this country. And at minimum, there should be some condemnation and aggressive condemnation of any school doing that. And now just to end, I will be in Hamilton and on March 15th, and then in London, Ontario on March 16th. So at McMaster and at Western. So if anyone's in those cities, please do come out. And I see that we have some questions, comments. I see Yuri first, so go ahead, Yuri.
Thank you, Evan. Wow. I don't even know where to begin. There's just so much dark farce and just so much double, triple standards that that's just unbelievable. So I have to change my questions. So I have to ask these kind of three interconnected questions and about the pivot to Asia, the new xenophobia that's being propped up. Aidan Jonah of the Canada Files was posting, some articles that he and his team have been doing to push back against the anti-China derangement syndrome and so forth. And in his post, he said that, the fact that the Globe and Mail, which tends to support the Liberal Party, particularly when the Liberal Party's right wing is in charge, tends to support. Was supportive of Stephen Harper, was supportive of Brian Mulroney's first years, that the Globe and Mail ceases, and a faction of the Liberal Party, which is batshit and really does want a war with China, this is basically kind of like, a coup that's going on in Canada to sort of push Trudeau, since the establishment is kind of, we're all fed up with Trudeau, but the right, but sort of far right faction of the establishment is really fed up with Trudeau and stuff like that, and the Conservatives have found their hero in Pierre Poilievre. So you have the Globe and Mail doing this. You have the National Post and Post Media attacking Trudeau from the right, and even some liberals and the NDP attacking Trudeau from the right. So are we seeing a kind of deep state coup against Trudeau just because they find that he's not tough enough on China, which is ridiculous. Kind of like kind of like the efforts to undermine Trump when he wanted détente with Russia. And then my other related question, and then my two other related questions is have you been impressed that the Chinese diaspora, the Chinese Canadian, the American Canadians, and even the Anglo Chinese have basically much of the Chinese diaspora is not playing along. They are refusing to be weaponized immigrants, to do this stupid model minority myth. And have you been quite impressed that by the Chinese diaspora pushing hard against the pivot to Asia? And since you mentioned Israel, Israel's the one that meddles into British elections, meddles into U.S. elections, goes out of its way to traffic girls in order to, conserve, their settler colonial state. So it sounds to me as if you, Hamilton, Kalishnikov, the war, and so forth need to really try to get Whitney Webb to do a tour in Canada about who's really meddling in elections, because it ain't China, it's Israel. And yeah, your thoughts on all of that.
Well, I think I'll mostly answer the first one, because I think that that is a really interesting question about Trudeau and what's going on with these leaks. There's people who suggest that, in fact, it might not be CSIS leak, and that it could be NSA, or I guess even the CIA, and that there's CSIS documents that may have been leaked to the reporters via from outside the country. Which, if that were the case, that would put the whole foreign interference thing in a pretty funny light, when this whole thing would be, of course, an example of U.S. interference very directly, not in an indirect sense. I do believe that, and I've said this many times over many years, clearly there has been a campaign from the military, the intelligence agencies, to pressure the Liberal government on China. And that's years of that. The arrest of Meng Wanzhou was part of that. Obviously, the most clear example was the whole banning of Huawei, and that was done very openly. That was like, we, as part of our Five Eyes alliance, we have to prioritize our Five Eyes alliance, which is another way of saying our relationship to the NSA primarily. That we have to ban Huawei because of that relationship. And Brian Mulroney actually wrote a thing, or was quoted, I'm not sure if it was Globe Mail article, where he said it like it was like explicit. He was like, yeah, I don't really know if there's anything with Huawei one way or another, but it doesn't matter. We have to prioritize our relationship to NSA over Huawei, or prioritize Five Eyes is our relationship. Now, so I do believe that the leaks are designed to specifically undermine Trudeau, and specifically designed not just Trudeau. There is a part of the Liberal Party. I mean, I think there are Chinese Canadian funders, donors that do make up a certain segment of the Liberal Party. That is part of the Liberal Party power structure. Are some ridings where there's large numbers of Chinese Canadians who don't want the anti-China, right? Who, they probably have all kinds of different opinions about the Chinese government, but they're not on board with this sort of like, oh, it's all horrible and it's all, we got to fight over Taiwan or whatever, right? They're not comfortable with that. And they're not comfortable with that probably for all kinds of reasons, from the way the media would, they have business interests in China, but also they don't like the blowback, the racist blowback of the xenophobia, right? So there's all kinds of reasons for that. So, and then I think that, and then also, of course, Trudeau has been close to the segment of Canadian capital, most obviously sort of Desmarais and Jean Chrétien, who was more. Desmarais was the billionaire who set up the Canada-China Business Council back in 1978, 79, and they didn't want banning Huawei, they didn't want arrest of Meng Wanzhou, and Trudeau has been sort of more in that kind of milieu. I think Chrystia Freeland is more of a pro-American person, and Trudeau would be, like, obviously he's very pro-American, but slightly less, more into trying to have independent foreign policy, if you want to call it that. So yeah, I do believe that, and I do believe that people on the left who don't like Justin Trudeau for all kinds of reasons should be very clear that we reject this both deep state, if you want to call it that, and conservative party. There's a partisan component to all this too, of course. It's just the partisan conservatives, a way to attack Trudeau. But we reject both the partisan element and the security apparatus element. At the end of the day, Justin Trudeau at least is sort of nominally an elected political leader, whereas CSIS is just this intelligence apparatus that, because in the early 2000s, when the U.S. empire was into its war on terror, CSIS was all about the Muslims. And now that the U.S. empire is in to contain China, CSIS is all about the Chinese, right? And this is not a coincidence. And that's why someone like Bob Fife, the Globe Mail reporter, he was back in the early 2000s, he was all about, the dangerous Muslim terrorists. And now he's, all about the Chinese businessmen who are corrupting our democracy. So I think we should be clear in pushing back on that. I've also, I made that point many times that, like, if your option is this sort of like capitalist corporate Canada-China dynamic, or this U.S. empire military industrial complex China-Canada relations, I prefer the capitalist, let's just make profit and exploit workers and destroy the environment dynamic than I do the empire military industrial complex, let's blow up the world option. So and with regards to Israel, I assume when you say Israel trafficking girls, I assume you're meaning through Jeffrey Epstein and the whole Mossad link on that. And that's what Whitney has a book about. I have not read that book. I've read some of the stories sort of around that. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I can't remember what the other one is, but I don't have much time. And go ahead, Phil.
There we go. That it? Good. Yeah, I agree with you on the whole thing. If they're going to do this investigation on foreign interference, they need to make it a broad net. It's got to encompass all countries, all interference, whether it's the other governments or the corporate interference. And also, I think maybe if like to tackle it from a foreign policy issue, maybe tie it in with like the Fair Vote Canada, because 40 to 50% of the population in this country don't vote. And it has nothing to do with China or Israel or America or anything. It's the status quo in this country, how they haven't represented the citizens of this country. So I mean, that's, I think, the biggest threat to Canadian democracy, is that 40 to 50% of the people don't vote. And if China's interfering, they're only interfering, or Americans or anybody, they're only interfering with the small section of the 50 to 60% of the population that does vote. So as far as threats to our democracy, I think the fact that such a large portion of the population doesn't vote, that's the largest threat to our democracy. And again, when it comes to foreign interference, just I think all Canadians there, open your wallet. Who's on your money? When Xi Jinping's on my money, then I'll start to worry about Chinese interference, But and also, like, I think the interference of like institutions like the World Economic Forum should be looked at too. I think Chrystia Freeland is on the board of trustees of that organization. So if they're going to do it, I think it should be cast a wide net and really dive into the problems of our democracy in this country. Be the wise thing to do if they're going to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, and there's the narrow, Trudeau broke a promise around changing the voting structure, and that's narrow about the specific functioning of the voting structure. But then there's also, just beyond any country, the biggest question is corporate power. That's the biggest threat to our democracy, both at the narrow of the political democracy, and then of course at the macro can you really have political democracy if you don't have economic democracy? And economic democracy, how can you have, you vote once every 4 years, but then in the workplace, it's a totalitarian structure. And then that spills out into the media sphere and the cultural sphere, and it got on and on and on. So yeah, clearly more than any country in terms of interference, or in terms of threat to democracy, it's both the corporate power structure and the electoral system are, infinitely more consequential. Go ahead, Roy.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I put on my calendar, you're going to be in Hamilton on the 15th and London on the 16th. Since Brantford's very close, I can take a day off work and promote you if you want to put something in Brantford. But anyway, on the subject that we're talking tonight on China interfering in elections, well, we in the capitalist world, we've always interfered in elections all over the world. I want you to comment on this, Steve. Since all the capitalist countries interfere in other people's elections, and in Canada we have the capitalist conservatives, the capitalist liberals, the capitalist NDP. I would welcome the Communist Party of China to interfere in our elections. I would love to see a Communist Party candidate run and present some ideas that the workers should all have jobs, that we should all have a roof over our head, that we should be able to buy food, enough to live on. I would welcome China to interfere in our elections. How would you comment on that?
Yeah, well, the first comment is that if you're able to, or if there's anybody else in Brantford that's into setting up an event, I actually could probably do one later in the evening on the 15th,
Yep.
or possibly early on the 16th. So you can get in touch with me by email on that.
I'll do that tomorrow.
But the other, I think that I think there is something to be said for the basic rules of international diplomacy, the 1961, whatever, Geneva Convention, I forget where non-interference in other countries' affairs is a principle of international law. I think that's generally a good principle. I get your point that we do need other visions of society, and certainly there's lots to learn about from what the Chinese government's done, maybe what the Venezuelan or Cuban, or maybe some of the Scandinavian countries, or there's different countries around the world that we can learn from. But I do think that I think that we're better off to go in the other direction of less foreign interference across the board, rather than sort of like leave it all open. Because effectively what happens, of course, is that, I mean, it's what happens right now, but at least in theory, where the Canadian American governments are not supposed to do that in Haiti, right? At least in theory, if we had a political culture that believed in international law, that we wouldn't do that in Haiti, and so I don't think that we necessarily want to throw out that principle.
Okay.
But so we're past 7 o'clock, and unless I don't see any, I'm not sure if my things sometimes doesn't work properly, but unless there's any other questions, I'll leave it at that. And thanks everyone. Same place, same time next week.